You're listening to Forward Faster, bite-sized insights for entrepreneurs.
Hi, and welcome to Forward Faster, NextCorps podcast series. I'm Holly Barrett, the Marketing Director for NextCorps. And today I'm so lucky to have Amy Gurske with us from Cause+Effect Strategy. And Amy is going to talk to us a little bit about the importance of data. But I just wanted to set the stage that Amy has worked with a lot of different big brands, including Amazon. And she also has 2 master's degrees and a PhD in industrial and organizational psychology. So welcome, Amy. Glad to have you.
Thank you, Holly. It's good to be here.
Now, data. So I think a lot of companies recognize the importance of data, but a lot of them are very hesitant to invest in it. Why is that?
Yeah, Holly, it's a really good question. And when I think about that myself, I funnel it down to 2 reasons. The first being fear of the unknown. So data can be intimidating, it can be confusing. And what organizations really need to do is look at that and acknowledge that this doesn't have to be an all or nothing solution. We don't have to be 100% or 0, but we can start to dip our toe in the water. Typically, why most organizations are hesitant to move forward with data is because either they've had a poor experience in the past, which typically has less to do with the data and more to do with the implementation and adoption. So actually ingraining those practices in the business, which can then lead to, again, that first reason of fear of wanting to get into it again because it didn't work before.
That brings up a really good point because I know data, in my experience, because in marketing, we use data a lot, but you also use data a lot to inform your business strategy. So,
Yes.
It can be a critical element to kind of putting a framework together for measurement, but also for building a culture that gravitates to using it and embracing it and adopting it and refining the strategy as you go along. So talk to me a little bit about the cultural aspect there of why this is such a challenge for us to embrace data.
Absolutely. And that's a great question. And it's a challenge that pretty much most organizations face. And really, what we're going to try to do is when we think about data, we're thinking about creating an organization of change because data, like any other program, you're going to be testing and measuring, you're going to be changing, you're going to be adapting, you're going to be tweaking it here, tweaking it there. And if you don't have a culture of change that allows you to, again, like I previously said, either dip your toe in the pond or get innovative or creative to be able to fail and maybe make a mistake and then come back and say, well, that didn't work. But ingraining that methodology and that behavior and that culture into the organization. Now, some of the tactical methods to do that are much like you said, building in the accountability metrics. How are you using data? Is it ingrained in your daily processes so that an individual coming into your organization knows, hey, when I'm putting together this strategy idea, I know that I need to make sure that I have the referencing data points to make sure that I have a backbone behind this idea before I present it to leadership. So by ingraining data into the actual organizational process, makes it almost like a check the box. And again, that leads to slow adoption, which will then get individuals into the spirit of, let me test and measure, let me try something different. Oh, this actually works.
Yeah. And I would imagine that in your experience working with companies that we all kind of fear change. And we have a problem with change. So we put up our barriers and, some of us are much better at embracing technology use around data. So I would imagine that if the whole organization is shifting behaviorally to embrace it, that it makes it a little bit easier for, it to take shape within an organization.
Absolutely, Holly. And one of the things that I did fail to mention is that, again, this needs to be from top down. So we can't expect an employee at the ground level of an organization to say, I want to launch this massive data strategy. Now, do I love that individual? Absolutely. But we need to see it from leadership. We need to see that adoption start at the top and communicate down through the ranks. So if we don't have the utmost buy-in at the top levels, it's not going to be a successful program.
What are some of the behaviors that you've seen management do from the top to help support that? Because sometimes, we talk about it has to come from the top. And a lot of times that
Yeah.
to employees can translate to a memo, like
Yep.
you need to do this, or this is going to
Yeah.
be in your performance system now.
Hmm.
But I think some organizations are so much more successful because their management do certain actions. So what does that look like?
Yeah. So, what that looks like, to be completely honest, is consistency. So, if you're going to be launching a change and you don't have a plan of attack of how you're going to communicate it, how it's impacting people on an individual basis, what the timeline is going to be, people need to know what to expect. So, there's a lot of communication that happens on the front end. But then after that, you need that continual consistency of communication, checking in, making sure people are actually utilizing the new systems, the new protocols, the new processes. So that's where that consistency, accountability, adoption. So I reference it to any sort of diet. You can have someone come in and say, I need you to eat exactly this every single day for the rest of your life. You might do it for a week or two, but if you have nobody checking in on you, what are the chances that you're going to continue it unless you start to see some great results? But eventually you're going to taper off. So the consistency, the communication, and trying to put yourself as leadership in the end user's foot or their shoe prints.
Hmm.
You know what I'm trying to say there.
Right.
Yeah, by putting them in their shoes, really understand like how it's truly impacting that person so you can best communicate and support them through that. Management's job is not necessarily to implement this. Management's job is to support the organization in the best way possible, knowing this is an extremely uncomfortable situation for a lot of individuals.
I would imagine that, as you know, our constituency is entrepreneurs, so they're pretty early stage in terms of forming their companies.
Yeah.
And it seems to me, in your description of what management should do, is that this is an opportunity for people to get on board with using data differently within their newly formed companies because they
Mhm.
can make it a habit and ingrain it into their business early on.
Yes,
Uh,
absolutely.
However, I would say sometimes when the conversation comes up around using data and doing analytics, that there's a cost associated with that. There's usually technology conversations of, I need to have this type of infrastructure or this type of software to help me do this.
Mhm.
Is that true all the time? Or are there small things that entrepreneurs can do to make sure that they start to use data differently from the get go?
Yeah, I love that question because we get that from so many of our clients just saying, this seems like it has to be astronomical. What we do over at Cause and Effect is we really want to understand the current state. We want to understand the baseline. Are you even utilizing the data that you have? Is it ingrained in your processes? We don't know what technology solutions you need until we know how your data works. So until you have a steady baseline, that's the first thing. And then take what you do have, make some of those small changes, make some of those implementations into your processes. And again, you're going to build an organization that's based on data. Now, again, will you eventually have to make some decisions around software programs? Absolutely. But instead of going out and making a very large purchase or a very large decision before knowing what you actually need, is one of the biggest mistakes that a lot of clients make. So slow and steady, figure out what you currently have, figure out how you can optimize it, and then go from there.
That's great. And I would imagine that this is an area where sometimes it's very important to have an expert, such as someone from Cause and Effect, to come in and kind of help with that baseline assessment because you don't know what you don't know. And
Mhm.
this is an area where your expertise could help them figure out structurally what they can even do more consistently, even if they have some base structure like a Salesforce
Mhm.
in their system already.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's like anything in life, really, a second set of eyes. And a second set of eyes that's trained to see specific things and see the roadblocks before we actually come up to them is the benefit of working with a consultant. Now, can you build that skill set internally? Quite possibly, but it's going to be quite expensive and quite labor intensive to make sure you have the right people. So to have, entry level discussions about directions and strategy, it is really nice to pull someone in who can give you kind of a, bird's eye view of the situation and their interpretation.
you're doing that right now for the Rochester Chamber of Commerce. I understand
Yes.
that you're doing like a big project for them. It was covered in the Rochester Beacon, so there's a great article that if you want to read about, what the work relationship is about, I would urge you to pull down that article. We'll provide that link for you. But talk to me a little bit of what you're doing for them, because they want to be more responsive in the future to businesses here and kind of evolve and match our growth pattern as a community. So how are you helping with that?
Yeah, absolutely. So, first off, the Chamber of Commerce has been phenomenal to work with. Everybody over there, from Mark to Shannon to Bob, has been phenomenal. And again, they're at the point where they want to make change, right? So, a lot of organizations, it takes a while to even get to that point. And with strong leadership, what we're able to do at this point in time, we started working with them in January, is we're optimizing what they have. So, we're not bringing in new technologies, we're looking at what they have, optimizing it. And of course, the situation with COVID, it's challenging every form of communication they have, from being in office to now being working remote. So little things from integrating phone systems to enabling features in ERP systems they already have, optimizing process. What does the reporting structure look like? All of this is of no cost to them, additional cost for technology, but it's just saying, have you thought about it like this? So, some very simple things that we can do in the first phase of this project to build a very solid structural foundation for them. So, again, identifying those gaps and figuring out maybe where we need to look for technology. But first things first, optimize, standardize, and foundationalize the program before adding anything fancy on top. But trust me, there's going to be a lot of fancy stuff coming your way from the chamber.
That is great. Now, I'll shift to organizations that aren't doing things maybe perhaps as successfully as the chamber. So, where in your experience do you find that organizations might be receptive to data, but they're not driving the accountability that perhaps is necessary to get the most out of it? Like you're saying, optimize it.
Yeah, absolutely. So, what I say to those customers is start small, pick a starting point and work backwards. Data can be used to solve very complex business problems. So, pick one problem. Where we tend to see organizations perhaps go awry is at the beginning of the process. Again, they want it all. We want to pull all of this in, we want to see all of this. As beautiful as that is, and I love the enthusiasm, let's pick one business problem. We're trying to, increase revenue by 20% by the end of the year. So make sure that we're setting smart KPIs. So when we know what you're trying to accomplish or the business case that you're trying to solve, then you go and figure out what data you need to support it. So instead of pulling all the data in and getting really confused as to what anything's telling you, by starting with that problem and then identifying what you need to know, then you pull in the data, then it tells the story that you need. So don't go too big. Start with one business case, one business problem, and work backwards.
I love that advice because we're constantly telling our entrepreneurs, because they have this idea, and while it might be applicable to multiple industries, it's like candy, and
Yes,
you're a kid in a candy store. And so you see the potential and you just want to go out there and seize it.
yes,
But again, you only have so many resources. So you're so wise to say, pick something and really focus on it, do it well, and then continue to monitor it. I had a boss in the past who I used to love because he would always say, people respect what you inspect. Right. And so if you don't have the data and you're not looking back, how do you know if you're successful hitting the milestones that you need to hit? Right.
right, right.
So
Or
crazy.
what valuable insights are sitting within your organization that you're not even aware of? Even looking at some of our client work, looking at the last 10 years of their client base and looking at patterns and trends and how has that shifted and how can that inform marketing, to human capital management. If we have to learn how to staff more efficiently, guess what? Data helps you do that. So if you want to start, again, pick that path, human capital management, whatever it may be, and then build from there.
That's great. Now, you obviously, with all of your studies, have been probably reading voraciously out there. Is there a book that you've read lately that would be you'd recommend, and it would be good for entrepreneurs to, kind of pick up and get some background?
Yeah, it's funny. I was looking through this and I do read quite often. And the most recent book that I finished, which I didn't know if I was going to go with this one, but as I reflected on it, it's so applicable to entrepreneurs. It's called The Change Monster. It's by Janine Daniel Duck. It was written in 2001, but it's an oldie but a goodie. It really discusses the human forces that fuel or break corporate transformation and change. So it gives you the things to avoid, it gives you the things to look for, but in a very easy to understand way. Many people are afraid of change, but the more you know about it and the change curve and where you are and where your employees are and why things are the way they are, it starts to make sense. So it's a very easy read. It gives you all the basics that you need to know on change, and can provide some really good education for someone who's not necessarily interested in people as much as I am, but some really great benefits to understand where people are and how they process change.
I haven't read that one, but I am going to pick it up.
Oh, no,
And
I'm going to send it to you,
oh,
Holly.
that would be great.
I have one sitting right here for you.
To you listeners, you weren't on the prep before we jumped on the call, but Amy and I both love Brene Brown because I think what we were talked about is that she describes why it's okay to be vulnerable. And so I think, you talked a little bit earlier about it's okay to make mistakes. So
Mm.
how do you help organizations look at failure can be a good thing, and it's okay to admit it, to be vulnerable enough to say, "Hey, but we learned from it." What are some of the things that you've seen in your transformational path with some of these companies that have helped them be more comfortable with that?
Yeah. So, what's very interesting is when you sit down with leadership and you ask, tell me about a time that you failed. That's always a question I ask in interviews. If someone can't tell you about a time they failed, then they're not living life. We have all failed, and from every failure comes a learning. And so, what I like to do is start with leadership and hear them talk about failure, because the more you open up the conversation to acknowledge that, oh my goodness, none of us are perfect, and oh my goodness, none of us know everything, and oh my goodness, I have to call my coworker because I have no idea what I'm doing. When you start to get into that environment, what leadership has to do is really create that environment of acceptance. And the way to do that is to lead by example. And I know that the people that I work with will constantly tell you that I'm asking questions, that I'm being curious, that I will reach out and say, I don't know this. I don't know if this is reading right. I don't know if this sounds good. Can you look over it for me? Some may look at it as a weakness, but let me tell you, it's helped me grow so much within my career and also with the customers that I work with. They tend to stick around for quite some time. So, yeah.
Oh, that's awesome. Now, you have worked in all these great cities, Boston, Chicago, Portland, but you're back in Rochester. So
Yeah.
why Rochester? I guess I'm curious.
Yeah, we were talking about how we've experienced different things through our career. And when I had finished school at Clarkson in upstate, there weren't a ton of opportunities for me in the Rochester area. And so I chose to move elsewhere following my career. What I've realized is, and I knew this to begin with, is first off, Rochester has got some of the best schools, some of the best talent. And over the last 10 years, we've really seen it start to become a shining beacon for tech startups, smaller companies like a Cause and Effect, because we want to retain the talent that we're training here. So you're going to start to see the emergence of even more tech startups in the Rochester area, and they're stronger than ever. So, me personally, I've worked for a lot of tech companies, I've consulted for a lot of tech companies. And there's nothing that matters most to me than bringing it back to Rochester, bringing my expertise and developing a community of like minded individuals in a place that I enjoy calling home. And if you ask my mother, it's because she wanted me to move home. But we won't tell her that.
Well, what you can tell your mother is obviously passion attracts good talent, right? And the fact that Cause and Effect has had double-digit growth year over year for the last several years not only speaks to the talent that's in the organization, I think, but also the fact that people are starting to realize that data can be such a driver for an
Mm.
organization and such a window into future opportunity if, in fact, we're looking for it and grabbing it to get into those markets early. So, what
Absolutely.
can you, with all of your talent that you have behind you in the organization, what can you, I would say, 3 things that you could provide entrepreneurs in terms of tips or advice on how to get started in using data more successfully for their organization?
Yeah. So, the first thing is really before data even becomes involved, when we're trying to identify that problem for data, be customer centric. Always be customer centric. It is not about you. We know as consumers that we need to be taught something new. We need to see something new. We need a new benefit. So when you're setting up your business before you even get to your data strategy, what are you providing that is so different, that is so new that you are teaching somebody? So that's really the first thing, which has very little to do with data, although you can do some research in data. Then becomes the data pieces. What are those important elements that you need to see on a daily basis that are going to cause you to make action? If you seeing a revenue number doesn't cause you to change something, so what? We have a so what clause at Cause and Effect. You can have a CEO sitting at a table and say, I want to see revenue number. So what? What are you going to do with it? The point is, we're not just looking at a number, we're looking at the action that follows the number. Okay, revenue is up 20%. Maybe I can cut marketing by 10, or maybe we want to bolster marketing because we've seen a huge ROI and we're going to go into these new areas. So data is a golden thread that holds any organization together. So starting at the entry point, figure out what you're teaching the customer, then figure out what data you need to support your operations in your business. Very simple things. And then start to try to understand them and see if you can find some of those trends. From there, fail often. Make mistakes, pick yourself up and jump back in. That's what we've all done. I think any successful person can tell you that they have been humbled or failed at some point in their life. And whoever is watching this, I know you're no different. So celebrate those failures, share them with others. So as a community, we can continue to grow stronger and continue to build Rochester as the IT hub it's going to be.
Well, I think we share that vision. So
Too.
I'm on board with you. And thank you so much for teaching us something new today. We are your customers. And also for telling us the emphasis around value. Always be of value and find value in new ways through the use of data. Thank you so much, Amy, for being with us today.
Thank you so much, Holly. It's been an absolute pleasure.
And for more information, go and check out Cause and Effect Strategy on their website. And feel free to reach out to Amy to ask questions too. Thanks again.